A very warm welcome to all of you who have joined us for today's event, which is to launch HMI Probation's annual report on the outcomes from our youth offending service inspections over the past year. Great to have so much interest in today's event. I think we had 120 people registered, so you're all very warmly welcomed. Today's session we can last up to about an hour and a half. I'm expecting the presentation of the results to last about 40 minutes, but there'll be plenty of time for questions afterwards. So do save up your questions and we'll make sure that we bring everyone in after that. Just to say that the annual report, which we launched yesterday, covers the results of 33 Youth Justice Service inspections, which we published between February 2022 and January of this year, and they relate to fieldwork which we conducted between October 2021 and October 2022. In the course of those 33 inspections, we looked at nearly 900 individual cases. We interviewed hundreds of caseworkers. We did focus groups with management boards, with staff at all levels of youth justice services and with external partners. So by combining all this data, we get a really rich, I think, snapshot of the current state of youth justice services across England and Wales. In addition to the local inspections, we also published an important thematic report undertaken jointly with Ofsted on education and training for children on youth justice caseloads, and we'll give you some highlights from that as well. Just very briefly talk you through the format of today's event. I'm going to kick off with a bit of an overview of key trends in youth justice in recent years, so you've got some background context. Andrea, our head of Youth Justice Inspection, will then start to talk you through the results of our most recent inspections over the last year, and then you'll be hearing from 4 of our HMIs about the detail behind those inspections. So you'll be hearing from Rebecca in relation to what our data shows in relation to children on court orders. Yvonne will take you through what our inspection results on out-of-court disposals look like. Mike's going to talk to you about our employment and training thematic, and you'll be hearing from John about the outcomes from our new standard on resettlement and the quality of resettlement work for children leaving custody, as well as what we know about different cohorts of children within our inspections and the results in relation to diversity and equality. And then we'll finish off with Andrew giving a quick overview of what our future plans are for a new cycle of youth justice inspections to start next year. Can I have the first slide? Those of you working in youth justice will be very familiar with these trends, but it's clear from the most recent published youth justice statistics that the real focus and drive on getting first-time entrants into youth justice system and on getting custody cases down continues to be successful. By these 3 metrics, police cautions, court sentences and the custodial population, all 3 of those measures have fallen by at least 75% over the last 10 years. So in the last year, which is the 12 months to March of 2022, less than 14,000 children got either a court sentence or a police caution, compared to over 70,000 10 years ago. And the custodial population is now less than 500, which compares to 3,000 or more in the 2000s. So some really strong trends and progress there. Having said all that, there is still concerns around some high profile and high harm types of offending. We know that teenage homicides in London, for example, in 2021 were at a 20-year high, and police recorded knife offences have only come down 3% in the last 10 years. So there are still some concerns about the nature and type of crime that is out there, and I'm certainly concerned about children as victims of crime, as well as those who are being processed as offenders. And a recent Youth Endowment Foundation survey showed that 39% of children have either been a victim of violence themselves or have witnessed it. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of the published statistics on the most recent year in terms of processing of children through the youth justice system. Just to bring, I'm not going to run through the detail of all this, but These figures include 8,000 first-time entrants into the youth justice system in the last year for which we have figures, which is nearly 80% down on 2012. Slightly concerningly, nearly half of the first-time entrants, their first-time entrance was directly into the court system for a fairly serious offence, and that remains a concern. I think the proportion of children that hadn't previously been known to the criminal justice system or received a formal sanction who are turning up in court being charged with quite serious offences. A couple of things that aren't on this slide and that do continue to concern me is the delays in our court system, particularly in the Crown Court system, for dealing with children, which has led to a significant problem with children being held for long periods on remand, which we're currently looking at. The average time from offence being committed to a child being to the sentence being completed has now gone up to 217 days, which is more than double what it was 10 years ago. And because the court system is being increasingly focused on the more serious offences, the average sentence length, the average custodial sentence length, is up by 6 months year on year. Next slide. One of the reasons that these figures I've shown in the previous two slides have come down so much is that obviously more and more children are being diverted out of formal statutory processes, whether that's formal cautions or court processes, and into out-of-court processes. Nearly 70% of the cases that we inspected, the 900 cases, were out-of-court disposals, and that's one of the highest proportions that we've seen yet. Next slide. And then if you dig down into that 68% of out-of-court disposals that we've been looking at, and on the caseloads of the services that we visited, an increasing proportion of that out-of-court caseload are informal, non-statutory community resolutions. So more than half of the out-of-court cases we inspected were those community resolutions. And we've seen a clear trend towards the use of Police Outcome 22 as the format for those community resolutions, although as we've gone around the country and as research by Manchester Metropolitan University has shown, there's quite a bit of inconsistency in how things like Outcome 22 are being interpreted and applied in terms of the range of offences that are used and whether or not they're being used as a genuine alternative to prosecution. Yvonne McGuckin is going to talk you through in a bit more detail later on this morning about this afternoon about what we're seeing for out-of-court disposals in terms of the quality of work that's being done. But I've been very encouraged actually by how much that quality has improved over the last 3 or 4 years. Next slide. Oh. So just final slide for me is to just offer a few reflections on how the overall ratings of the services we've inspected have changed over the 4 years that I've been Chief Inspector. And I think it's a good news story. In spite of all the challenges of the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, we are seeing pretty strong performance actually from the services that we inspect. So in the last year, 70% of services we rated as good or outstanding, and that compares to 58% in the year before the pandemic. And overall, over those 4 years that I've been Chief Inspector, over 60% of services we rated good or outstanding, and only four out of 108 services have we said were inadequate. And as you'll see in this presentation, even in those services, we've seen some good improvements once we've gone back to re-inspect them. So well done to York and to Hammersmith and Fulham and to Swindon, who were all rated as outstanding last year. Great to see the work that was going on in your local areas. Right, Andrew, I'm going to hand on to you to talk a bit more about what we found last year in our most recent round of inspections.
That's great. Thank you so much, Justin. Holly, if you could move on to the next slide, please, that would be perfect. So an overview of what we found in our 2021-22 youth inspections. As Justin said, we inspected 33 youth justice services all the way across England and Wales. Wolverhampton was the first one in this annual report period, and they achieved the rating of good. And Swindon, as Justin has just said, was the last one in this annual report period who got a rating of outstanding. And as Justin has highlighted, overall, it's been a really positive picture. So we've seen 70% of services that have been rated as either good or outstanding, and we've had no services that were rated as inadequate in this annual report period. Holly, if you could go on to the next slide, please, that would be great. Thank you. So what we've done in the annual report this year is we've actually chosen to include some detail around the recommendations that we've most frequently been making. And what we wanted to do was really to identify those areas that we have both kind of been most often drawing attention for youth justice services, and the areas that we would like them to be focusing upon in their action plans once we've been there and had an inspection. The recommendations that we've most frequently made in this last year are in relation to practice, and more often they're around the core activities in terms of assessment, planning, delivery and review. These are commonly linked to things such as improving practice around children's safety and well-being, or improving the practice around understanding the risk of harm that they might present to other people. And things that we more commonly are drawing people's attention to around that are the kind of the quality of assessment activity, making sure that there's really sufficient analysis, effective analysis, the use of information to inform those assessments and assessment activity, and really understanding children's patterns of behaviour and pulling all of that together to make a really holistic assessment, really, in terms of what those children's behaviours are and what their needs are and what work then needs to be done in terms of supporting those children not to reoffend. In planning, some of the areas that we most commonly see in terms of recommendations are around the quality of contingency planning and making sure that they are really tailored to the needs and the concerns that are related to each individual child. We have seen an increase in the number of recommendations around resettlement and diversity. We introduced the resettlement standard and an increased focus on diversity in 2021. And so to some extent that does reflect the spotlight that we've put on that. And John will talk a little bit more about this when he talks about resettlement and diversity and the characteristics that we're seeing in terms of children on youth justice service caseloads. We've also seen some real variation in terms of the quality of out-of-court disposal policy and provision. As Justin said, it's good to see that the gap has closed in terms of some of the work that we were seeing around there, but we are still seeing huge variation in the use of outcome 22s, how they're delivered, how they're deployed, and some of the work that's being done in terms of out-of-court disposal. For education provision, more commonly, the recommendations are about making sure that children under youth justice service supervision have access to really good quality provision, which is appropriate to their needs. And Mike led on our ETE thematic, and he will talk us through those findings as well in a little bit more detail when we get to that section. What we do know is that our child first focus really is now very well embedded in many youth justice services, and many services are recognising the importance of kind of meaningful involvement and interaction and work with and engagement with children and parents in sort of service delivery, thinking about how services are developed and how they're evaluated. And what we've seen as a result of that actually is that we are making less recommendations around this, but it is still an area that is of vital importance. We just see more often that actually this work is now being picked up in relation to the work that youth justice services and management boards are doing. One of the key things that we have done this year is we continue to raise some real concerns in relation to vacant probation officer posts and secondments, and we've seen some significant gaps across the services that we have inspected this year. We totally recognise the pressures that are on the probation service itself and in terms of its staffing. But we know there is a statutory obligation in terms of fulfilling these roles. And we also know what seconded probation officers add in terms of youth justice services. So in terms of contributing to things around the transition of children, in terms of supporting the management of risk, often in terms of understanding things in relation to MAPA arrangements. So to see the gaps in this provision is a concern, and is a significant concern to us really at the level and the frequency with which we've seen it. So again, there are some key recommendations in relation to that this year. Next slide, please, Holly. So as Justin was saying, we have done some re-inspections that were included in this annual report period. Ordinarily, we only will, with the current programme, we will only inspect a youth justice service once in each cycle. But if we have particular concerns about that youth justice service, often where we may have rated it as inadequate, we will go back and we will do a re-inspection, and that is in order to ensure that service improvement and improvement in the provision really is being driven. Western Bay was a consortium of youth justice services in South Wales, and then that was subsequently disaggregated into 3 local authority areas. And this in this period, we've done re-inspections of Bridgend and of Neath Port Talbot, and we've saw significant improvements since our first visit there. Similarly, we've also found that Cardiff has made considerable progress since our first inspection of that area, and is really well into its improvement journey in terms of where it's going now, which is really positive. The biggest difference in terms of re-inspections that we've seen has been in Surrey, and in terms of the ratings between our first and then our subsequent inspection. And John, you were the lead in terms of our inspection of Surrey, so I will hand over to you, John, if you could give a brief overview, please, in terms of what we found when we went to Surrey for our re-inspection.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So I led the re-inspection of Surrey. I wasn't involved in the original inspection of Surrey in 2019. When we went in there, we found a service that had recently become integrated into wider services within the local authority, within children's services. And overall, we found that agencies and services did need to be better coordinated in the delivery of interventions if they were to be effective. So that whole concept of an integrated model is one which we have seen in place in lots of yachts that we go into, and we often see it implemented with a great deal of success. It just was not effective in Surrey at the time of the first inspection, specifically because we found there was a real loss of focus on youth justice within that integrated model. So within that initial inspection, we identified that there were many areas where practice was poor, specifically, as I say, concerning the delivery of specialist youth services. They weren't being adequately prioritised and hadn't been for some time. We weren't also satisfied that staff had that knowledge and experience of understanding what was required to address issues of safety and well-being and risk of harm. It was almost a kind of a generic, almost generic early help offer to some degree. So when we went back in, we did see significant improvement. So we did see that same philosophy and that same approach, that child first approach that to be fair had been there the first time that we went in, but we saw much greater focus on ensuring that children's needs in relation to desistance were understood and supported, and also an understanding of how best to ensure that safety was first and foremost part of the consideration within the activity that took place. I think one of the great misconceptions when we come into to inspect services is there's a feeling that that child first approach and that approach which focuses on ensuring that risk is managed effectively is almost mutually exclusive. We didn't see that being mutually exclusive when we went into Surrey. We saw a joined up approach there in regards to how those 2 areas of activity were managed. We also identified that it wasn't actually a new approach that had been introduced when we went back into Surrey. They were still using the same model, that same integrated model of service delivery. But what we did see was that far greater focus on ensuring that youth justice was first and foremost in that cohort of children who we were inspecting. When we went in the first time, one of our concerns was that we didn't think children were receiving their full legal entitlement to education, and the reasons for that weren't fully understood. So when we went back in, we saw a much greater focus on how the Youth Justice Service there identified the challenges for that specific cohort of children open to the yacht. So they were focusing much more on areas such as the exclusion of children from a racially minoritized background, and the impact that was having on children who then went through into the youth justice system. We saw activity being undertaken by education link workers, again coordinating that. We also had concerns about health provision not being sufficient, gaps available in services, and long waiting lists for appointments. When we went back in, we saw that there'd been real active work undertaken to ensure that a substance misuse worker was in post, and that capacity, therefore, for prompt referrals was increasing. We saw greater support for mental health support for children as well. I think overall, one of the key things I took from that inspection in regards to the improvements that were made, what we saw was a really collaborative approach. So we saw improvements, changes to service delivery, discussions of the strategic plan. Those were all being done with staff and not to staff. And for me, that was the key to the improvements that Surrey made, ensuring that staff were at the forefront of all of the activity and improvements that subsequently were made. That's it from me on the re-inspection. Back over to Andrea.
That's great, thank you. Next slide, please, Holly. Brilliant, thanks, Holly. So in terms of organisational delivery, we examine 4 aspects when we are inspecting youth justice services. So we look at the leadership and governance, we look at the staff, we look at partnerships and services, and we currently look at information and facilities. In terms of leadership and governance, over the past 4 years, we have consistently rated between 40 and 60% of inspected services as having good or outstanding ratings for leadership and governance. And it is really pleasing to see a year-on-year improvement in this proportion from last year to 60% in last year's report. Staffing remains a real key strength for most services. Over the past 4 years, staffing has been one of our highest rated standards, with 65% or more of inspected services being rated as good or outstanding. And again, it was pleasing to see over 3/4 hitting this mark in 2022. In terms of partnerships and services, over the past 4 years, we've rated over half of these services as good or outstanding on this standard. And again, it was pleasing to see this proportion reaching over 75% in our annual report for 2021-22. And we had 6 services that were rated as outstanding. And in terms of information and facilities, in 2022 report, 79% of services were rated as good or outstanding on this standard. And this is the highest proportion in 4 years. 4 services were rated as outstanding, and these include Blaenau Gwent and Buckinghamshire. Holly, if you could go to the next slide, please, that would be great. Thank you. So if we drill down a little bit more into the detail of this, in terms of leadership and governance, for those areas that scored really strongly, such as Thurrock or York or Blackburn with Darwin, what we found were board members that were really actively engaged, and they were supporting and they were challenging the work of the Youth Justice Service. And there were really strong relationships with partnership agencies. We would find board members who had really sort of supported the service, and that they would respond to new developments or new things coming in quickly, and were really active and proactive and agile in terms of how to respond and what needed to be put in place. Conversely, in those areas where we rated as requires improvement, what we found were things such as inconsistent membership of the management boards. We might have found board members that were not of the appropriate seniority, board members who didn't really understand their roles or their responsibilities. And we found some instances where there were board members who may have had really limited knowledge of the work of the Youth Justice Service, and limited knowledge in terms of where they fitted in with all of that, really. In relation to staff, areas rated as outstanding, such as Wolverhampton, West Sussex and I think Sutton. We saw things such as really stable staff groups, really good opportunities for training, and the real sort of bedding of learning. So any learning opportunities properly embedded in terms of the services and really proactively taken forward. We would see workloads that were reasonable and that were, again, really actively and proactively managed, and the allocation of work that really considered the capacity of case managers, the skills of case managers, which enabled them to deliver a really high quality service. We would also find things in terms of effective strategies around maintaining delivery when maybe there might be staff sickness or periods of unplanned leave, and kind of a real proactive response again into making sure that children still got a high quality of service, even if there were staff that were unavailable to deliver it at that time. People were reallocated, work was done so that it did not kind of disrupt the work that was being done with those children. In those areas where we did rate as requires improvement, we found some evidence of retention or recruitment difficulties, often some vacancies that hadn't been filled or had been sort of held vacant almost, actually, interim arrangements or real delayed kind of recruitment, if you like, in terms of what were key roles. As Justin outlined earlier, and I know something that he was really keen to include in this year's report as his final report in his time with us as chief, I think it really is important to highlight that in the majority of youth justice services, what we do find are really highly motivated, highly committed staff that really are focused upon doing the very best that they can, and that comes through in nearly every area that we've inspected. In terms of partnerships and services, this is where the multi-agency nature of youth justice services really can shine. We've seen some excellent examples of children being able to access a whole range of services and get a range of support, so that they're getting the right interventions that they need at the right time without waiting lists, so that they can access those services when they need them most. And we've seen some brilliant examples in terms of work done around children's speech and language and communication needs, children's mental and physical health, and support in terms of sort of substance misuse. And in terms of sort of information and facilities, we've seen some really beautiful examples actually in the last year of areas where we've been, where children have contributed to the design of premises, where they've made sure that they're really welcoming and that they're accessible. And all of those factors actually we find contribute to children engaging and attending and wanting to kind of attend in terms of going to those places. We've seen examples where spaces have been developed specifically in terms of girls and facilities that provide a range of activities such as craft, woodwork, pottery, cookery, all sorts of things. We've also seen some really lovely development of outdoor spaces for children, and they've been really positive to see. In examples where we have rated areas as requires improvement in terms of IT and facilities, often it's because we found examples where youth justice staff did not know how to access appropriate services or providers, IT might have been outdated, or the accessibility to it was limited and often didn't support remote working. So I will now hand you over to Rebecca, and she will talk you through in terms of our findings in relation to court orders.
Thanks, Andrea. Next slide, please, Holly. Okay, so when we're talking about court orders, we're considering anything that goes through the court from referral orders through to custodial sentences. In this group, we tend to find children who have complex needs, and we have significant concerns around risks to and from them. Some key findings from the services in scope including youth justice services continuing to have access to a wide range of services, as Andrea's just touched upon. We've also seen an increasing proportion of children on court orders who present a serious risk of harm to others and have been involved in behaviours including violence. Work to promote assistance is our strongest area when we compare it to safety and well-being and risk of harm to others. And another key factor is effective management oversight is crucial to promote an effective practice. We found that contingency plans do still need to, contingency plans and contingency planning still need strengthening, and that these should be more tailored to the child's need and have real clarity on what should happen should risks to and from that child increase or change. Overall, we found that there needs to be more attention given to victims and in the work that's delivered. Another key finding, as Andrea's touched on as well, is around the commitment and dedication of staff to developing strengths and protective factors and involving that ongoing engagement with children. Next slide, please. So we do use the Aspire model to assess court disposals, and that includes assessing, planning, intervention and reviewing. And broadly, just under 2/3 were rated outstanding and good. So just a little bit more detail, as you can see from the graph, we broke it down into those areas. So of the 32 services that were rated, when we're looking at assessing, 9 received outstanding, 11 were good, 10 were requires improvement and 2 inadequate. In terms of areas that were doing very well in being rated as outstanding as good, we found that practitioners were using a wide range of sources and information to help them understand the child and their experiences. We found that there was really good collaboration and involvement with children, families and carers to understand their experiences. And there was a real balanced approach to risks, but also looking at strengths and protective factors. When looking at planning, you can see from the graph that we've got 5 services rated as outstanding, 15 as good, which is the strongest area in this group, 9 as requires improvement and 3 is inadequate. Again, strengths was that continued involvement of children, parents and carers and getting their perspective on planning activity. And we found that was particularly good when trying to plan to address risks to and from the child, that really co-produced approach. In terms of areas that weren't as strong, we found that the planning had been affected by the actual assessment not identifying all risks and needs, and that impacted on work identified to support that child and the family. So looking at implementation and delivery, you can see that 14 services were rated as outstanding, and this is our strongest area, so to speak. 5 services were rated as good, 12 as requires improvement, and 1 is inadequate. Again, the real strength that we could draw out was that commitment and dedication by practitioners who were very proactive and advocated for the children and families. We found that it was really tailored to their needs, focusing on strengths, protective factors, but also any risks to and from that child. Again, where we found areas not scoring as highly, it was the implementation around keeping that child safe and keeping others safe that often drove the lower scoring area. Okay, and if we look at review, 10 services were rated as outstanding, 9 were good, 10 requires improvement and 3 as inadequate. Again, some strengths that we were able to pull out was that continued involvement of children and families and carers, and getting their perspective on what's working, what's not, and that real collaborative approach. And again, taking that information to adjust programs of work and intervention to meet the changes in the child's circumstances. Where we found it wasn't as strong was areas not recognising when changes had happened and not tailoring work to meet the potential changes in risks and safety of that child. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand over to Yvonne now for an update of out-court disposals.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we've headlined there some of the key findings. I'm just going to take you through some detail now. It's been really positive to see the improvements in the quality of out-of-court disposal work since 2019. Over 80% of the cases that we have looked at have been rated as sufficient for assessment, planning and delivery of services. Our process for inspecting out-of-court disposals is similar to that for those when we look at court orders. However, we don't inspect reviewing and that aspect of work, mainly because of the short duration of most out-of-court disposal. Typically, children are offered out-of-court disposals when they've committed low-level, often first-time offences, and there's a range of options available to offer as an alternative to the child going to court. Often decisions regarding the child's suitability for an out-of-court disposal are made jointly between Youth Justice Services and the police. But we continue to see a range of practices for determining the most suitable outcome following an offence by a child. Decision-making processes that agree whether a child receives an out-of-court disposal are designed locally, and there is currently no clear national template for this work. Out-of-court disposal arrangements are typically developed either at Youth Justice Service or police force level, with arrangements often applying across neighbouring Youth Justice Services or police force areas. The limited and variable national and local oversight of out-of-court disposals, along with outdated guidance on them, has resulted in a wide variation in their application across England and Wales. And we've found significant differences in the way that they are deployed across the areas we've inspected during this period. Next slide, please. In previous annual reports, we've reported that the quality of assessment planning and delivery for out-of-court disposals was significantly poorer than those for statutory court options, the youth cautions, youth conditional cautions and court orders. However, what we've found is that gap is narrowing. The quality of work in assessment seems to have closed. Although fewer areas were rated as outstanding for their work on out-of-court disposals when compared to court-ordered work, more areas were rated as requires improvement and good. We saw a number of areas rated as good in their assessment of out-of-court disposals. Next slide, please. So just to go into some of the detail now, in terms of assessments, in some youth justice services, case managers had no knowledge about a case until it was allocated to them after a decision had been made. We saw cases where the decision on the disposal had been made in isolation, without including the child or taking their views or of those of their parents into consideration before deciding the outcome. This meant that case managers often had less opportunity to meet the child and the family, to build that relationship and to encourage their engagement in voluntary activities. We found that this could have a stark impact on whether or not a child chose to engage with the service they were offered. In a minority of cases, we found that disposal decisions were up-tariffed. This is where children were given, for an example, a youth conditional caution to make sure that they engage with an intervention when a community resolution could have been more suitable. We also found examples where cases have been progressed to court despite an out-of-court disposal being appropriate. Increasingly, we're seeing use of locally developed tools for out-of-court disposals, and that's around the assessment of needs for children. And there's variation in both the quality of the tools themselves and how well they are completed. What we notice in particular is the depth of the analysis that considers the child's safety and well-being and the risk that they present to other people. The needs, complexities and risks of children receiving out-of-court disposals vary across a very, very wide spectrum. And we've seen cases where children who present a significant risk to others have received out-of-court disposal. This can present real challenges to youth justice services when they're trying to strike that balance between being proportionate and avoiding criminalisation of a child, but also in recognising the risks that they may present and the seriousness of some of the offences committed. We also found instances where concerns about a child were not identified effectively or considered because of the so-called low-level disposal that they had received. In some inspections, we found that youth justice services are struggling to resolve these challenges. We found examples where some tools, such as an early help assessment tool, did not consider or provide the opportunity to consider a child's safety and well-being, especially when it was related to activities around offending and the dangers that brought to some children. Because of this, there were instances where the assessment lacked that depth of understanding. In terms of planning, as you've already heard from Rebecca, with statutory orders, contingency planning is an area that requires strengthening. In many of the cases we reviewed, there's a need for practitioners to ensure that they know what specific action they need to take if there is a change in circumstances, especially if that risk is around the child's safety and well-being or risk to others. Exit planning also requires work, particularly when many out-of-court disposals are short, so that there's a focus on integrating or reintegrating a child into mainstream services when the Youth Justice Service intervention ends. In terms of implementation and delivery, many youth justice services we inspect now find that children given out of court disposals can access the same range of services and resources as children subject to statutory court orders. There are a range of interventions available, including access to speech and language therapists, CAMHS and support for education, training and employment. We noted that some youth justice services work with children on out-of-court disposals for as long as they needed support. While it's positive that this is in place for children, it does raise questions for us about the possibility that youth justice services are undertaking work that should be provided by partners, such as early help services. This was particularly notable in authorities where early help services did not play an integral role or link to the out-of-court disposal scheme. This also raised questions about children being brought into youth justice services and in fact the youth justice system in order to access much needed support services rather than effective diversion that's intended by the out of court practice. In terms of policy and provision, there's a growing trend for the police to offer an outcome 22, which enables them to record a final no further action once a child has completed an appropriate diversionary or educational activity. We welcome the review of the youth gravity matrix used to determine whether the children should be considered for out-of-court disposals, and the YJB's recent guidance on the use of outcome 22. We hope that this will go some way to ensuring that the use of out-of-court disposals is more consistent and also meets the need of children. And I'd just like to share with you a case example that we've included in the annual report that just shows what can be achieved in terms of strong multi-agency working. And the example is taken from the inspection of York's Youth Offending Service, as Andrea said earlier on, that achieved outstanding. One of the things that impressed us was the cooperation and joint work between the speech and language therapist within the Youth Justice Service, who undertook an assessment on all children. That assessment was then produced into a quick, rapid guide and made available to all police officers via their handheld electronic devices. What this meant in practice was that police officers coming into contact with children could identify immediately if the child was known to the Youth Justice Service and then access this rapid information guide. And what York had found was that this had massively improved the way that police and children interacted together. And it was avoiding unnecessary escalation at that initial point of contact. I'm going to hand over to Mike Ryan now, who's going to talk you through the findings in terms of education, training and employment. Next slide, please.
Hello there, my name is Mike Ryan and I led the thematic inspection which reported in June 2022. I think everybody involved in youth justice services would acknowledge and understand that a fundamental building block of desistance would be engagement, productive engagement in education, and the conclusion of the thematic inspection would be that we would seek to foster an ambition around what can be achieved with children in and through education. We undertook a thematic with Ofsted and Estin, and the inspection highlights the critical issues for or the critical barriers for children, poor identification of special educational needs, the prevalence of long-term, part-time timetables, poor attendance at school that went unchallenged, and high rates of formal and informal exclusions. We found a very fragmented picture. We've gone on to make 18 recommendations in respect of education, training and employment, which is twice as many as the previous year. There are clear gaps in provision, and the barriers we've summarised. There was and is very good practice in respect of education, training and employment, and I would commend the effective practice guide that accompanies the ETE thematic inspection. It's full of examples where the work is being done really well, with some quite extraordinary achievements with children being reported through that vehicle. Last and not least, we see very high levels of children who are post-school age recorded or reported as being not in education, employment or training. There are examples in this group of inspections, for example, Hammersmith and Fulham, where 90% of the children are recorded as being in employment, education or training post school age. So there is hope, and there are aspirational approaches to be replicated, I believe. So thank you for that, and I'm going to pass you on to my colleague John, who will address the next slide.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so to give some feedback on resettlement. So the resettlement standard was one that we introduced into our inspection methodology in 2021, primarily because of the negative outcomes we'd seen in our resettlement thematic inspection prior to this. So the introduction of that resettlement standard has enabled us to rate individual youth offending services on their arrangements for effective resettlement provision on a consistent basis now. So when we inspect resettlement, we consider policy and provision, and where there are relevant cases, we also examine service delivery. It's worth noting that even in the biggest yachts, we're not inspecting huge numbers of resettlement cases, which reflects the rapid decline in the number of children who have received custodial sentences over the past few years. But if there are no resettlement cases within the previous 12 months before the inspection, then we simply look at the resettlement policy and provision and review that, but the standard itself is not given a rating. So in the annual report period that we've looked at, we reviewed 63 resettlement cases across 27 youth justice services. And overall, I think it's fair to say that the introduction of the resettlement standards into our inspection programme does appear to have had a really positive impact. And when we talk about impact, it's really clear that this is a real point in case. So we have seen a real increase in services focus on resettlement activity. And as a consequence, many services have reviewed resettlement policies or in a number of instances recently introduced them. One challenge I would put to any yacht managers that are on this call, if you're about to review your resettlement policy, the challenge I would put to you is how you will ensure that it's not a cut and paste of one of the good practice resettlement policies that are out there. There are a number of good practice examples, and for me the challenge, if you're looking to renew your resettlement policy, is to make it bespoke for the context and needs of the particular yacht and local authority area that you're in. The other challenge as well is to ensure that resettlement policy is bespoke for the needs of children who are remanded in custody, who now make up 45% of the children in the secure estate at the moment. And as Justin mentioned earlier, we're undertaking a review of remand activity at the moment. So overall, in regards to resettlement, the majority of inspected services during the period of our annual reports are now delivering effective resettlement interventions, which was not the case when we did that original thematic. Next slide, please. So we've revised our inspection standards elsewhere. So we've also revised our inspection standards in July 2021 to look in a much greater focus on diversity. When we talk about diversity, we're talking about those bespoke, personalised approaches which all children need, but also we're referring to those 9 protected characteristics enshrined in law, which services must make sure that effective and suitable provision is provided for. So that revision to our inspection standards means we now have much more explicit references to diversity across all the domains of our youth inspections. We look for evidence that the Youth Justice Service identifies and responds to a wide range of needs at every stage of the youth justice process. So we found that almost 30% of the court cases that we inspect are children who are looked after by the local authority. So this seems to be a persistent issue. It certainly it is a figure which remains persistently high. Certainly when I reflect back on my days managing youth offending teams in the past. A third of those looked after children are also out of area placements. So that brings that added complication of how to provide effective case management supervision for children who are moving across areas and boroughs and local authorities. 42% of the children in the court cases we inspected had some sort of disability. Worryingly, we also found that rates of both children in care and children with identified disabilities are significantly higher among children committing the most serious offences dealt with by court. Black and minority ethnic children are more likely to feature in court-ordered cases in our inspection samples, where they account for just under a quarter of the cases we inspect. Next slide, please. So the final input from me this afternoon is to reflect on the characteristics of children on Youth Justice Service caseloads. So we found that almost 30% of the court cases we inspected are children who are looked after by local authority, with a third of these being out of area placements, as I've just referred to in the previous slide. So 42% of the children in the court cases we inspected had some sort of disability. The most common form of disability that we identified was a learning disability, but there were significant levels of mental illness within the cohort of children who we inspected over this time period as well. Rates of both children in care and children with identified disabilities are significantly higher among children committing the more serious offences dealt with by court. And I should note an early piece of feedback from our remand thematic, which we'll need to look into in more detail over coming months as we look at that data in more detail, is that potentially there are similar there's a similar pattern emerging with those children who are remanded into custody who commit those most serious of offences. Black and minority ethnic are more likely to feature in court-ordered cases within our inspection samples, and again they account for just under a quarter of the cases who we inspected. Next slide, please. And now I believe it's back to you, Andrea.
Back to me.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Thanks, John. Okay, we as an organisation, we're committed to hearing from the children, carers and family members about their experiences of working with youth justice services. At the moment, we have a couple of methods, which includes a text survey, phone interviews, in-person interviews and focus groups, if that's appropriate. Within the period we're looking at, we had 138 children that we spoke to and 34 parents and 2 carers. Overall, we had some really kind of positive reflections from those who participated in terms of their experience. A significant amount felt that their worker had the right skills and ability to work with them. They made comments on experiences where they'd assisted improving education and training outcomes for their children. We did see a small number of negative comments, but that was in relation to, or more in relation to, where the children were seen and places for their appointments. We are committed to looking at this in a little bit more detail and evolving and changing our methods to engage with children. We have developed an educational, an informational video which will help explain what we're trying to do and why it's important that we want to hear from children, families and carers. Other elements of our inspection framework we include look at how the youth justice services incorporate the views of the children, families and carers they're working with and use them within service development. I think that's me. Thanks very much. I'll hand back over to Andrea.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Last slide, please, Holly. Okay, thank you. Thanks everybody for presenting and for talking. So that is last year's annual report, just in terms of what next for the youth programme. So we are in the middle of some fantastic development, actually, in terms of our new programme. We've done a whole load of detailed scoping in relation to the new programme. We've established a stakeholder working group. Many of you are here with us today, and that has representation across England and Wales. We've got members that also include the AYM and Yacht Managers Cymru that are part of our stakeholder working group. And we've done a session in terms of scoping in relation with them. We've also done some scoping with some academic experts that we've met. We've met with the Youth Justice Board, the Youth Justice Policy Unit from the MOJ, and many other people as part of the scope. And we've also met with the other inspectorates as well to develop that scoping. On the back of that, what we have now developed are some draft standards. We talked about them this morning in our Youth Programme Board, and we spent yesterday with the team as well to go through these and start to refine those and get them working in the direction that we want them to be going. And then what we've got planned is a series of roadshows and consultation events. These are due to take place in August and September. And what we really want to do is make sure that we talk these through with the sector and with anybody that's involved in youth justice, really. So please do look out for information in relation to these, and please do attend where you can. There will be 7 events across England and Wales, and then there will also be a virtual event as well to make sure that we have the opportunity to discuss it with as many people as possible. As Rebecca said, we're also commissioning Peer Power to look at both the work that we're currently doing in terms of children's participation and actually how do we do that more effectively and engage with children and parents and carers. But we're also then making sure that we are working with children and parents and carers as part of the development of the new programme. So that's also a piece of work that we're doing to make sure that they can contribute to what those standards look like and how our methodology will look and what it will look like in terms of the new programme as we move forwards. Our intention is to finish this current programme by autumn 2024, and what we will do is once we've got the sort of the draft programme in place, we will then also look to pilot that just before we finish the current programme to make sure that it's ready to go, and we've then trained all of the team in terms of being able to deliver the new programme. So exciting things ahead in terms of the new programme and where we're going. If I hand back over to you, Justin, if that's okay, and then we will open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thanks to colleagues for some excellent presentations. You've heard a huge amount of material from us. I put the link to our annual report in the chat if you want to click on that. And we've got half an hour now for questions, when happy to, if you could raise your hand or put a question in the chat. Very happy to answer any follow-up questions you had on what you've heard or what you've read in the report. We have a question. Let's have a look. Kelly.
I'll go first. Thank you very much. I've read the report, and thank you, Andrew, and everyone for sharing your information. My quick question was about that process, that moment when you're trialing out the new framework with the piloting as well as finishing the old. Obviously, you can't tell us who's going to be. Are you going to plan to go back to some that you would ideally re-inspect, or are you going to go to serve a youth justice that you think are quite established to kind of have? What I don't want is anyone to be almost used as a guinea pig and to then have that mark. And yeah, speaking from someone who requires improvement and last year and doesn't want to be any further.
I can answer that, Justin. Is that okay?
Yes, thanks, Andrea. Yeah.
So Kelly, it's a really brilliant question. What's really interesting is that we've got quite a few of the people that are part of our stakeholder working group are people that are saying, actually, I don't mind if you come and pilot on us. So we have had some of those offers. We've also had offers from people that we've relatively recently inspected, or we might have inspected right at the beginning in terms of some of that piloting work. And the way that I envisage it being in terms of the piloting period is that I would want it to feel quite collaborative. So we will be learning, we're going to be trialing it out. We're going, the last 2 days I've been immersed in conversations about the draft standards. We want to make sure that we're asking the right questions and that we're looking at the right things. Ultimately, we want to drive and help services in terms of delivering the best possible service that they can. So the piloting phase, I think, will be very collaborative, is how I would anticipate that would look, and we wouldn't just kind of plump people out of thin air, as it were, in terms of landing on you and then saying we're going to, I would want us to have conversations about how it would look and what it will look like in order for us to properly test it.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, great comment about York, and that is a great innovation there with the speech and language assessment information that I had a visit to York a few weeks ago, and they talked about that, and I was really impressed with that as an idea. So it was great to hear about that. Andrea, I don't know whether you mentioned where our workshops are going to be over the regional stakeholder workshops over the summer.
I can absolutely do that, Justin. Hang on. So I can give people the dates as well, because we've got those now booked. So we will be promoting those soon. It will be the 17th of August, will be in Manchester. The 22nd of August, we will be in Birmingham. The 12th of September, we will be in Bristol. The 14th of September, we are intending to be in Wrexham in Wales. The 19th of September will be a London event, and the 26th of September will be an event in Newcastle. I haven't got the virtual one down, but that is a couple of days later in September. I know we will do that. And what we are hoping to do is we will hopefully have some members of the youth team as well that attend all of those road shows, and we'll be there sort of mixing with people in the room and facilitating conversations and making sure that we really hear the feedback that people have got to give us in terms of the draft standards. I think just because the capacity, we will probably limit it to 2 youth justice services per place, but that you don't have to attend the same road shows, if that makes sense. So you can go to different road shows, and yeah, we would really welcome people engaging with us, and we want to hear what people have got to say in terms of our proposals.
Thanks, Andrea. So yeah, we'll circulate further details of that, but plenty of opportunities to come and hear more about our standards and to feedback on them as well as we start to develop all of that. Jennifer, you had a question.
I did. It was for you, actually, Justin. It was because I was reading the introduction to the annual report, and I noticed you said that you didn't think that first-time entrance was a useful measure anymore. So I just wondered if you were able to say anything more about that.
Yeah, I think because first-time entrance only counts statutory police youth cautions, or YCCs, as well as convictions, it is missing out a whole load of informal community resolutions. I think the table I showed you was, more than half of out-of-court disposals are now informal community resolutions, which wouldn't show up in the first-time entry measure, or indeed a reoffending measure. So We've been arguing since 2018 that the Ministry of Justice and YGB need to publish some national data on how many community resolutions are being given out, and also evaluate the effectiveness of these disposals, whether people do finish them, for example, and what the, I guess you'd call it the recycling rate rather than the reoffending rate. I think what we really need is a measure of how many people are coming back through the door of a youth offending service and back through a panel for consideration to see how effective these disposals are. I am slightly worried now that a lot of these out-of-court disposals are being, particularly outcome 22s, are being recorded as no further action, and therefore there's a danger that they don't feature when you do a search for people's previous involvement in the youth justice system, and that's will increasingly mean that you're missing out on a lot of potential intelligence. So that's why I say it's given a very partial measure now of the degree to which children are or are not desisting from crime, which I think is an increasingly big gap that it will be good to fill.
Thank you.
Justin, just on that as well, I mean, just to add, the other thing, Jen, that we are seeing is we are seeing some instances where children are getting lots and lots of NFAs, and it's that they're not, that's not being picked up anywhere or recorded anywhere, and we think we need to keep an eye on that really and look at what is happening in relation to that, because there are some instances where children are getting repeated NFAs and then actually will commit a very serious offence, and it's the suggestion is that those children have almost come from nowhere, when actually there are some indicators that they haven't come from nowhere at all. So that there's something about just understanding what's going on in relation to that and pulling some of that data and that intelligence together really.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you.
Just on that, I think the other factor as well, Andrea, just picking you up on that, is children who get released under investigation multiple times as well before they get that supposed first time entrant into the youth justice system.
Any other questions? Do put your hand up or put something in the chat room. We've got plenty of time to take more comments or observations from you all. Laura, you come up on my screen. Did you have a question?
Hi, yeah, just really briefly around re-inspection. I know that with children's services, when we have Ofsted inspections before, and I suppose you haven't got the outcome that you'd wanted, they come back in 6 months and they kind of talk to you and they go through things. That hasn't obviously been our experience here. Is there something, and I know that from other local authorities, you know, and youth justice services, particularly if you don't get the result you want, there's such a flurry of activity, and you know, you're almost then waiting and wanting, come back, you know, come and see that we've done all this and we've done all that. And I know that certainly in Sutton we went inspected for 7 years, and then we got an inspection, and it seems to sometimes be quite not hit and miss, and I understand that you're driven by lots of different factors as to where you decide where you go. But I do think there'll be something in terms of the new inspection, like going forward, just something in terms of that understanding of timings. And, you know, normally you sort of say within 4 years, is it 4 years? I know other YOSs that are 5, 6 years. And it would be helpful, I think, without telling us exactly when you're coming, because I get that, but just a bit more of an understanding around kind of when you come back, when, you know, what you know, in terms of that new framework would be helpful for us.
Justin, do you want me to respond to that?
Yes, please.
Firstly, hi Laura, it's really good to see you. It's a great question. It is something that we are grappling with, and we're talking a lot about as part of the new inspection programme, and that actually we want to be more agile than this idea of starting a programme and running a programme and finishing a programme and everybody gets inspected and you might not see it again for 7 years. So those are certainly conversations that we're having at the moment about what it might look like, and looking at having, we've been speaking with Ofsted in terms of the ILACS model, the kind of concept possibly of focused visits, annual conversations and inspections, so that those are things that we will be talking about at the roadshows when we come, and just what that will look like. It's always interesting in terms of re-inspections, because I know some people will say you came back too soon, and if you'd have given us a little bit longer, then we would have been where we wanted to have been at the point that you came back. Other areas are like, absolutely, please come back to us because we're ready to kind of showcase all the work that we've done. So we're also really mindful of that as well. So they are certainly things that are up for discussion in the new programme, and we are thinking about those and thinking about how it will look. And again, we would really welcome people's feedback when we have the roadshows and the consultation events, just on how we can do that most effectively, really.
Thanks, Sandra. We got John, you've got your hand up, and then Ian.
Yeah, hiya everyone. I'm not too sure who wants answers. I just thought I'd throw in there. Obviously, a lot of us have been involved with turnaround activity since late last year, and about, has there been any thoughts about whether you would or should bring that into sort of inspection sort of focus?
Very good question. We were talking about this morning, weren't we, Andrea?
We were indeed. We absolutely were talking about it this morning, John. I have had quite a lot of contact with the Youth Justice Policy Unit as part of Turnaround. And we, in fact, I think we're meeting again in about a week's time, just in terms of offering some clarity with our current inspection programme around in terms of which turnaround cases might be eligible and which turnaround cases we absolutely wouldn't look at. One of the critical things in terms of our current sample is whether there is an offence for which a child has received a disposal in relation to turnaround. So some of those turnaround children potentially are in at the moment. Some of them we wouldn't be looking at. We wouldn't look, for example, if a child's RUI'd or if they received a court fine or those sorts of things. So we've had those conversations with the Youth Justice Policy Unit. And as Justin said this morning, we have been talking about it in terms of our new programme. So again, it's things that we are looking at and things that we are thinking about.
Yeah, thanks, John. Good question. Ian.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, good to see Mr. Gardner again, my former member of staff. John, good to see you again. I'm just recently become the independent chair for Bracknell Youth Justice Service, a very small yacht. And I wondered, and I may have missed this because my computer decided to do a refreshing whilst John was speaking, actually, around in terms of small yachts and your thinking around that, because I noticed that our good friends up there at the M4 from us, West Berkshire, you weren't able to inspect them on Domain 2 in terms of community sensitive. I can tell you, we haven't had a young person in custody, remanded or not, in Bracknell for 4 years. So let alone going back 12 months, you know, that of course could change at any time. So I just wondered if there's any thinking really around, you know, particularly with the decrease in the number of youngsters going to custody, decrease in numbers of coming through the courts for small yachts, how you get you're going to get a rounded view of a yacht. And it may even go back to Justin's comment about first-time entrants and community resolutions and whatever. Just be interested in your views on your thinking on that.
Andrea, I mean, we have tweaked our methodology to reflect the fact that we are seeing increasing numbers of small yachts with very small sample sizes, but it's obviously something to think about for the next cycle as well.
It absolutely is. I mean, we did a review, I think it was at the beginning of last year now, Ian. I forget, time flies, doesn't it, when you're having fun? So I think when we did that review, one of the things that we did, and you're absolutely right, with West Berkshire was an example, I think Bridgend was another example, we made a decision that we wouldn't rate an area if there were less than 6 cases. And that's because in domain 2 or domain 3, and that's because it could skew the ratings. One case could skew the ratings so much in terms of whether it would be an inadequate or an outstanding. So we've made that decision. What we still do with those cases is we still will do the kind of the full case inspection on them. We will still meet with case managers, and we will still give feedback. So we'll give a more of a narrative feedback in the reports around those cases, and in some instances, what we've done is so that if there isn't the number of D2 cases in terms of court disposals, but there are a higher number of D3 in terms of your out of court disposal cases, we will then look at more cases as part of that when we come and do our inspections. And again, we are thinking about what that looks like in terms of the new programme and how we try and make sure that the new programme is fit for purpose right across all of the varying sizes of the youth justice services that we see. We see some very, 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 very small ones. And then obviously there's Birmingham, which is the biggest youth justice service in England and Wales. So we are certainly thinking about what it will look like in terms of the standards would apply to all, but what the methodology might be like in terms of the new programme.
Thanks, Andrea. Any other questions? I can't see any more yellow hands, but do put your hand up or put something in the chat. We've still got time if people had other things they wanted to talk about. I think we may have reached the end of the questions, colleagues. Thank you very much to HMI probation colleagues for some excellent presentations. Thank you to Holly and to Amelia for their work on the presentations and for arranging the logistics for this afternoon. It's been, I hope people have found that a helpful overview of our findings. It's been a really productive set of inspections around youth justice over the past year. I am pleased to be leaving as Chief Inspector with some positive messages about how well they have lasted and come through the pandemic. I think it's a great tribute to everyone who leads and works in youth offending services about the great job that they've done, not just in the last year, but over the last 3 or 4 years. So well done to all of you out in the audience for all the hard work that you do to keep your services going and to support the children that you work with. I really do pay tribute to that. Thank you all for dialing in. Thanks again to my colleagues. Do have a read of the report if you haven't yet. The link is in the chat. And lots of other material as well on our website. If people are interested in our research. We've done a lot of research on youth justice issues over the past year. There are excellent thematic reports on the website, not just Mike's employment training, but a great report on Black and mixed heritage boys as well, and Yvonne's still very important report on accommodation for people, on support for children using custody as well. And look out for our forthcoming report on remands into youth custody, which John has been leading. We've just finished the fieldwork on that, and that will be coming out. John, when will that be out? In the autumn, I guess?
Yeah, that's correct. We're my colleague Bob is writing the report over the summer, and I'm going to be doing the effective practice guide. So there'll be an editing process. So we're looking autumn for both of those pieces of work to come out. And we're looking to have a launch event when they do as well. So look forward to seeing everyone who's joined this call to join that call as well when those get launched.
Thanks, John. So yeah, look out for that. And then following on from that, we'll be doing an important thematic on the transition of children from youth justice services up into adult probation, which Maria Jerram will be leading, and that will be starting off, I think, fieldwork in early next year. So look out for that on the horizon as well. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the day.